Hey everybody, before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to let you know that if you didn't know, did you know that you could save 20% off your purchase from Arcadia Publishing? That's right, you can use checkout code Haunted Vermont and get 20% off your entire order. Otherwise, you can use our special link, arcadiapublishing.com/Haunted Vermont and purchase through there. Any way will help support not only Arcadia Publishing, but it will also support us here at Haunted Vermont. Now, enjoy the program. Welcome everybody to another episode of Beyond Haunted Vermont. Man, I'm going to have to get used to this. But again, this is our brand new series. And if you have a story that is beyond the Green Mountain, we would like to chat with you. But next up here is a very special guest. You may know him from, well, maybe, is his work when it comes to Florida with the Haunted Florida stuff. I personally know him because he was featured in the 2013 documentary of the Bridgewater Triangle that came out. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what he was also talking about in that documentary and maybe just a little bit more. But anyway, without further ado, please say hello to Christopher Balzano.
How are we doing today?
Oh, it's a wonderful day. It's kind of humid, but now with the rain, it's kind of like, it's nice, but it's not nice.
I get you. I live in Southwest Florida, so you have to learn to love lightning here. Where I'm in the lightning capital of the world right now, so it happens on a daily basis.
Oh, I love lightning and thunderstorms and stuff like that. That's like my favorite thing.
Yeah, they're a different thing here, so it's pretty awesome.
Oh, I believe it. And we'll talk about a little bit more when it comes to storms, should I say, later on. But for right now, Chris, for those that may not have heard of your work, because you do quite a bit. You, like I was mentioning here, you were on the documentary for the Bridgewater Triangle. You also have your own little podcasting that you do, Tripping on Legend, and you're an author and storyteller, if I may say, for like events and stuff like that. But anyway, without me trying to tell the audience who you are, how would you tell everybody who you are?
Wow. Well, I've been involved in the paranormal for a little over 30 years. I'm from Massachusetts, born and raised in Massachusetts, lived in New Hampshire for a while. And when I was kind of, I was always obsessed with a really good ghost story. And so kind of coming up, people always say, how did you get into this? And they normally, like someone who does what I do, they had experiences when they were a kid or something like that. I had none of that. I just had an encyclopedia knowledge of ghost stories and horror movies and absolutely loved it. And I went to college in addition to that, folklore and mythology and all those things. I went to Emerson College in Boston, and my dorm was the Charles Gate Hotel in Kenmore Square, which is one of the most haunted buildings in Boston. And so I just started documenting what people were experiencing in that building, right? And they would have all these crazy experiences. There's a ton of stories. They spend a lot of time, if you go onto in a Boston, haunted tour, they stop right in front of the Charles Gate and they actually tell some of my own personal experiences there. But what I became obsessed with was this idea of these people would tell me these haunted stories. They would tell me their experiences, or they would tell me what a friend had experienced or something like that. And then I would say, well, why is that going on? Like, what's the story behind it? And then they would spiel off some kind of haunted folklore that I already knew from 1,000 other places. And I'd be like, wait a minute, hold on a second. All these places can't have the same backstory. And so I became obsessed with what I called the crossroads, like the intersection of a true haunting, and then the stories that we make up around it, and how we kind of tend to fall back on all these stories we've heard over the years. And I just happened to be in college at the right time and spark at that. I then became um, an authority on Massachusetts hauntings, not because I had a crazy knowledge, but because I was one of the first ones to have a website dedicated to ghosts just in Massachusetts. It was called Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads, and because it was one of the first, people would be searching for more information on a story they had heard or even something they'd experienced, and they'd find me. And so I just became this kind of dumping ground for all of these people who needed to vent about ghosts they were experiencing, and just kind of through that, then people were saying, "Well, can you help me?" And so I was, okay, and I, basically was almost forced in some ways to become an investigator. So in those early days, like pre, the Ghost Hunters TV show and other shows like that, I was already kind of out there investigating, and I did that for years as well. And then now I like to call myself, this is what I call myself, a reformed paranormal investigator. Meaning that I got into this because I love the idea of ghosts and some of the theories behind it, but also all of these ghost stories and ghostly legends that people have been sharing for years that kind of attach themselves every time someone experiences something creepy. Why is that ghost walking on the road? Well, it's because his wife broke up with him, and like all of these stories that repeat over and over and over again, just in all these different locations. And so, what I do now is something called legend tripping, which is about experience over evidence. So when I go out now, I put away all of the equipment that I used to as an investigator. I get these stories from usually the small towns all across Florida, and then I go and I research the community. I research the history of the town. I try to figure out why people are telling this story and why they're telling it this way. And then I go out and I experience it just the way the people in the community say. So if you're supposed to go to a haunted bridge and you're supposed to turn around and you're supposed to say, there's just one in particular in this place called Boyant, Florida, right? And you're supposed to go to this bridge that's in the woods over the creek, and you're supposed to turn your back and you're supposed to say 3 times, "I know where Jonathan is. I know where Jonathan is. I know where Jonathan is." And the ghost of Martha in her wedding dress comes across the bridge with a noose around her neck and taps me on the shoulder and says, "Help me find him." I'm going out and doing that. And I'm not trying to gather evidence of it. I'm not trying to, trying to debunk it. A lot of people, when they hear my stuff, say, "Well, you just said that's not the story. So are you saying that the ghost doesn't exist?" And I'm like, "No, I'm saying this is the story that's been made up of why the ghost exists." And so that's kind of, the nature of what I do now. And we videotape it and we record it for the podcast and just, to get it out there to people, but we don't use any equipment or anything like that. And quite honestly, we don't even really care whether the ghost is real, quote unquote, real or not real. It's all about the belief that a community has in its ghosts.
Can I stop you right there then? Because this brings up an awesome question that I was not really planning on asking, but because of just how you just worded that, makes me want to ask this. So,
yeah, go ahead.
So now I got to figure out the way I want to ask it. So with the way things are, Chris, how you just kind of said it, you're going out there because you want to basically almost do like a step-by-step of this is kind of like what you just said, like a step-by-step. It's almost like a step-by-step guide. So anyway, what I'm trying to get at is how do you feel about this whole, like, when people believe it enough, it's almost as if it manifests. It's almost like a manifestation where it actually comes to life. Have you thought of it in that?
I totally like the whole idea of like a tulpa, of like a thought form where so many people feel that a haunting is a haunting, that it actually creates the ghost that you've been talking about all along.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in, I guess you could call them like, drama ghosts. And I say that in terms of like some place is haunted. So I'll give you an example of a drama haunting. We have I do a tour through downtown Fort Myers, which is where I am in Florida, and there's a haunted school. And this haunted school is called the Gwynn Institute. And for years, people have talked about how it's haunted by the ghost of the original principal, a woman by the name of Miss Hamilton, right? And since I've taken over the tour, I have really focused on this place because so many people who go there get pictures of Miss Hamilton in the windows, right?
Okay.
Well, over probably the last year, because it was my birthday, around my birthday last year, we have gotten a ton of pictures, and sometimes people they bring some equipment on the tour or whatever, of evidence that there are children, the ghosts of children, who are also finding their way to that building. Now, both Miss Hamilton and Miss Hamilton, maybe she has a reason for being there. She didn't die there or anything like that, but this was like the most familiar place. Like, she dedicated her life to this place. Why are those ghost children there? And so one of the theories that I have is those children are, because tons of children have died in Fort Myers over the years. I think they find their way to that building because people are paying attention. They love the stage, right? Hence the drama part. They love the stage. They like the idea that people are paying attention there, and so they find their way there so that they can kind of try to reach out. So I
In a
think a
way,
lot
it's
of the
like
paranormal, I think a lot of the
mhm,
paranormal, especially in these places that become really well known,
mhm.
I think part of it is we are creating some kind of energy there that acts as like a thought form or a tulpa. And then I think a lot of times uh, people who are ghosts find their way to these places because people are there looking for other ghosts at the same location, and they're somehow in some weird hierarchy of ghosts. The spirits know that people are paying attention in different places, and so they find their way there to try to communicate.
Right. In a way, what I was gonna say, which sorry for interrupting there, but it was almost like reminded me. It's almost a way of them to basically say it's a way to be heard. So it's like their story will probably be able to get out, quote, the drama aspect, because if they're getting drawn to the crowd per se of the
Yeah,
talk, then I almost feel like that would be a way for them to at least be heard. So maybe they can continue to get that quote drama attention, where they can get the attention that they want, so that they don't feel alone anymore. Or maybe they just want to at least be acknowledged enough, so that once they
exactly.
know, they can move on, because once they know we're gonna be able to talk about them for, let's just say, years to come, then yeah, I mean, at least now they know that they're not gonna be forgotten.
Yeah, yeah. So think of it this way: like, imagine there's a really popular band, and they're going to be performing at this theater, right? They're going to be performing at a concert, and a
Hmm.
whole bunch of people looking to like protest something go to the show and hold up their signs protesting something, or set up a little stand trying to sell something because they know all these people are coming to see that big show.
Right.
It's kind of like that idea, right? Like, so they're finding, these ghosts are trying to find any stage that they can, and it's these paranormal landmarks. Like, I think that's why if you take some of them, a really good example would be like the Lizzie Borden house, right? And
Mm.
people get all of these different kinds of ghosts at the Lizzie Borden house. And it's really interesting because over the years, not so much now, but over the years, for a while there, people were getting these ghosts that were, especially like little children. And it was one of those things where, there were a whole bunch of different theories on it, but one of the theories that I kind of had on it was, well, these children know that you're paying attention, right? Like, the moth goes to the flame kind of thing. Like, they're wanting to, they're wanting to get their attention for whatever reason.
Yeah, which, if I remember correctly, with what you're talking about, they're also trying to determine where some of these children came from because some of the kids I think they were in contact with weren't actually there during the time of the quote murder per se. They just kind of just like you said, just kind of they got drawn to the house. I think
Yeah.
is
So yeah, I mean there are the ghosts of some children who did die in the house pre Lizzie Borden and pre Borden family. But
Mhm.
then there are other ones that I think that are just drawn there.
Right.
And so they're getting the stage they need. And I think that happens a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
think that happens a lot. But what happens is that what we do as consumers of the paranormal, right, or observers of the paranormal, is that over time, sometimes over time, you can see either the legend switch, right, like the legend flip, and like what is going on now is different. And if you really like what I do as a legend tripper, I'll find the same location and I'll find 7 or 8 different versions of legends or of ghostly backstory to explain what people are experiencing. People are still experiencing something, but what the story is, it shifts based on kind of what people are observing, and a detail might come out or an experience might conflict with what the ghostly legend is, and it becomes kind of well known enough that people move the actual needle of the legend or the needle of the backstory of the ghost.
Okay, so my counteract question, I guess, would be: so could we could we say that the legend shifted because of basically it depends on who entered the location? And I'm kind of saying that as like it could just we could be talking Wizzy Burden's house or anywhere really. So that's why I'm saying like that's why I said it the way I said it. But
Yeah.
could we look at it as like it depends on who stepped into the location, be from like whether their intention was good or bad.
Are you talking about the observer,
Uh,
like the person who's experienced the haunting, or the ghost itself?
who's gonna be experiencing it? Like
Yeah,
they're
totally.
looking to
Like,
experience it.
so, one of my favorite um, ghostly places in Florida is Silver Springs Park, right?
Okay.
And that is, so if you want to think Silver Springs Park, the creature from the Black Lagoon was shot there, right?
Mm.
And the old TV show of Tarzan was shot there. The movie Legend, like Tom Cruise's first movie or second movie, was shot there. I mean, it's a really famous place. And over the years, it went from being it was the first real amusement park in Florida. Like it predates Disney to some degree. Disney kind of killed it, but it had these glass bottom boats because the area was so savage and yet so beautiful that people would go all through the springs in these glass bottom boats so they could look down at, like, those, imagine like just a tour where you're going through where the creature of the Black Lagoon was swimming through, right? And
Mm.
then
Yeah.
over the
Okay.
years, it became an animal park, and then had all the then it became like it had the Seminole Village in it, and it really became this massive, massive place. And there they talk about the ghost of these they see orbs floating on the water, right? Like in the morning time, dusk especially, the place just has on the water just these balls of light that are flying and dancing all over the water, right? In addition to that, people sometimes see this canoe which goes near this one area which for years was called the bridal chamber, and then it became known, now it's known as the abyss. People really don't even talk about it now, but back in the day, like, for a while it was known as the abyss. Well, as I was tracking that legend, what I found was the story kept changing to what the people in the park wanted to hear. So it was originally a very Romeo and Juliet type story, where it was this, there's this couple who they weren't able to be together, and so they ended up both dying on the water. And I'm giving you a very short version of the story. And it was these two Americans. It was and he was the son of a plantation owner nearby, and she was one of the plantation workers, and they weren't allowed to be in love, and so they ended up both dying on the water. And that boat you're seeing is them taking the boat, and then you're seeing their spirits on the water. Then once they moved the Seminole Park into that area, all of a sudden the story became almost the exact same story, but it was two different Native Americans. Why? Because people were going there now because it was the Seminole Park. They wanted the story to be about Native Americans, and all of a sudden, boom, it's now about Native Americans. And as every kind of new company came in and promoted the park a different way, who those two people on the water were kept shifting to whatever the personality of the park became. So people were going there expecting to see, these orbs, or people were now seeing these orbs even floating on the water, which was something new. And now it became, well, those are the spirits from the forest who were hunting the people when they were coming in. And so it's one of those things where the story has actually changed based on the expectation of the audience over the course of 130 years.
That makes sense. That kind of reminds me of like a tale we have here around Lake Bomazine. It's like a rowboat, and you're supposed to be able to quote witness this rowboat kind of floating around the water, where supposedly these two men disappeared, vanished from the rowboat itself. And supposedly the story is something like these guys that were working across the lake wanted to get a drink, so they two men volunteered to go get the drink and bring it back, basically. So they used this rowboat, but by the time they got into the middle of the lake to this certain area, this fog rolled in, and then when the fog kind of started to go away, it was just the boat itself. So now the legend is basically saying, like, on a foggy night, keep your eyes on the lake, basically, because you just may see, the floating rowboat that they disappeared on, kind of
They
thing.
disappeared on. Right. So if I was doing that as a legend tripper, I would go out there, in a kayak or on in a rowboat myself, and I would bring beer with me. Because I'd be trying to be like, all right, let's see if we can spark this legend. Let's see if we can kind of, step in the footprints of what people are saying about the legend. So that's amazing. I would love to actually go out there on a foggy night.
So that bring back to the question that I was asking you before. Would that be would that fall into the category of we're almost trying to manifest it in a way? It's almost like we're pushing that energy. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think, that we have no idea what ghosts are, really. We have no idea what their need is, or what their, what keeps them here, or what, any of that kind of stuff. All of that, although everything you hear from everybody is theory, right? And his ideas. And
Hmm.
so, I think just, if the idea that a ghost is a human in a different form, right? The majority of experiences people have, they're ghosts. It's a human, and so if that human is intelligent, you know, first thing everybody needs is to be safe. Well, ghosts, can't die, so it's safe, right? But then as you kind of like go up that whole like hierarchy of needs, you have attention. And I think that if you're giving a ghost attention, now whether that's an actual exchange of energy or just the acknowledgement that something exists, if I'm like I'm a 50-year-old man, like I would be the most uninteresting ghost of all time. But if I could go to an asylum that's nearby and pretend that I was a little kid who had died at the asylum, everyone's gonna want to talk to me, and so I'm gonna get attention, even if it's not specifically about me. And so I do think that kind of thing does occur, especially in these really famous haunted locations that people go out of their way to seek out.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I got a interesting question for you, Chris. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but we'll see. So I'm gonna counter what you were saying. Like you don't seem you would be like an interesting ghost. Now, what if when your time does come, Chris? Right? What if you could pick that specific time in your life where you could just go back to and almost relive it, right? Like, here's an example. Like, let's say you could go back to being 26 again, right? Would you want to present yourself as a spirit as your 26-year-old self?
Well, first of all, would I have to have my ex-wife in this ghost example? Because I don't want that. That's where I
No,
was when I was 26.
no. Let's just. Well, what
I
if you
think,
could go back in time where you felt like you were your happiest, basically?
yeah, like I don't know that. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I've never thought of that. But I think that if my goal was to get attention, then I would. I'm a believer in the authenticity of Ouija boards and other spirit boards.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm also an advocate for using them, so I'm not an anti spirit board person. And I can say that you never run into like my name's George and I was an accountant and I died of old age. It's always, you know, I was killed, my body is buried in the next door neighbor's yard. It's always these absolutely sensational ideas. So yeah, I'm not sure if I would go back to any part of my life specifically, but
Hmm.
I would have the best backstory ever if I was a ghost. Like I would want everybody to want to be looking for me and communicating with me, and I would try to do it as interestingly as possible. So I don't know if I do something specifically about my own life, but I would
Hmm.
definitely be really a lot more interesting than I am now.
Gotcha. Uh, the reason why I bring that up is because I forget what show this was on, but it kind of got my got my wheels spinning about this type of thing where uh basically this little girl, if I remember the show right, this little girl died at the age of like 7 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been years that was passed, and it was gonna be basically this lady's daughter. And by the time the show came out or whatever, they tried to communicate, and basically they asked the spirit, which at the time they thought it was the daughter, basically, but they weren't quite sure. But anyway, the point I guess is by the time they figured out it was, I guess this daughter presented herself as if she was 22 years old. So it
Huh.
was almost like, even though she had died at 7, it was almost like she was still growing up. So and by the time uh, they got back to the parent, the parent did confirm that if she was still alive, she would have been
She
like
would be
22
that
years
age,
old.
yeah.
Yeah, they would have been that age. She would have been that age, yes.
And I know that Sylvia Brown and the other guy who, wow, I haven't thought of his name in years. It's the guy with the mustache, the older guy, like Van something. Who is one of those famous crossover kind of mediums.
Mm.
I can't remember his name, but both of them and other psychics talk about the idea of that when you die, your frequency becomes that of a 33-year-old, right?
Mm.
And you and that's kind of like, and obviously that's got religious connotations with Jesus and things like that. But their idea is that there is this kind of automatic, like I guess it's like almost like a perfect number, and so that when people die, they become their 33-year-old selves in heaven, or what might be like the afterlife heaven area. And that's kind of an interesting idea. I'm not sure if I believe it, but I do know that I do know that that's something that's kind of pushed out there by some of the more famous of the psychics, like those really, really famous psychics.
Right. Interesting. So I guess, Chris, to fast forward just a little bit. So I mentioned like you were on the Bridgewater Triangle. So how did that come to be? Because, like I said, your little segment in that, I wish I had time to actually rewatch that documentary because it's been a little bit for I could actually say more of how you
Yeah.
presented the Pukwudgies. But yeah, so kind of explain how did that kind of come to be, and I guess we can lead us into the segment of like what is the Pukwudgie?
So I had when I everything that I just told you about, starting to research and starting to collect stories from people. So
Mm-hmm.
when I think it was between my sophomore and junior year at Emerson. The book, The New England Ghost Files, came out, right, by Charles Robinson. And we bought it and we loved it. We were obsessed with that book, like my group of friends and I. And we loved the stories that were in there. So once I created my website and I was exploring haunted stories and haunted legends, we, not knowing at the time, we saw that a lot of the stories in that book were focused on this one area or this one town called Rehoboth, Massachusetts. Now, we didn't know at the time Charles Robinson was not only living in Rehoboth, but he also worked as a part-time writer for their newspaper telling stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one year we went out and we essentially legend tripped all of the stories from that book that take place in the town of Rehoboth, right? And so we just kind of hit all those stories. And of course, as I'm researching and as we're doing this road trip, I'm documenting all of that on my website. And so I would talk about a ghost in a town in Massachusetts, like a town, like let's say Boston itself, right? I
Mm-hmm.
would do that and it would get some pretty good traffic. Then I would publish a story about something in that area, like near Rehoboth, and I would have 10, 20 times as many hits on the website about it, and I would have, multiple emails that would be sent daily about people telling me their experiences or wanting more information. And then I would have this really cool story from a town near Boston, which was close to me, and no one would really respond to it. And then I would publish something about, Stonehill College, and I'd get 100 people would email me the first 2 days. And so I started to be like, this is really, something weird is going on here. And at the time, I was working with this guy named Chris Pittman, and I started to see his name, and I'm like, Chris, is this you? Like, we worked at a sub shop together. I'm like, Chris, is this you? And he was, at that time, the leading authority, I would say, of cryptids and UFO sightings in that area. And I was slowly becoming someone people were turning to for the ghost part of it, not even knowing, like literally working right next to each other, making Italian subs, not knowing that we were researching the same thing an hour and a half away from us, right? And he's like, yeah, it's all part of the Bridgewater Triangle. And I'm like, what's the Bridgewater Triangle? And so in other words, it wasn't one of those things where I had read about the Bridgewater Triangle and then started researching the stories. I literally was out there researching all these stories and then finding this bigger concept of the Bridgewater Triangle, which, Lauren Coleman had started talking about it in the late 70s. He published it in his Mysterious America book in 1983. And it's essentially this triangle that stretches all through the southeastern part of Massachusetts. If you ask me personally, I say into Rhode Island. And it's everything that happens in the paranormal world happens to an amped up degree in this area of Massachusetts. So Bigfoot sightings, UFO sightings, crazy, weird, odder than odd, ghostly activity happens there. All of this, weird history happens there. And so the more that I researched it, the more it was like, oh wow, this is something. And so, I started publishing about the Bridgewater Triangle, right? And articles and things like that. I called Bristol County the Cursed County. And one day, at the time, I was a librarian. And my boss came into where I was working. I shouldn't say a librarian. I worked at a library. Anyone who has a degree as a librarian would not want me to say I was a librarian. I worked for the Suffolk University Law Library. And so my boss came in, and he's like, hey, because he loved ghosts. Hey, it was around like this time. So like our budget, like we were waiting for like the new fiscal year. So there's a lot of downtime. He's like, hey, have you ever heard of Freetown, Massachusetts? And I'm like, actually, he said Freetown. I said, you mean like Africa? Like my father had, come back from a trip to Freetown, Sierra Leone. And he's like, no, Freetown, Massachusetts. He's like, go check it out. And he's like, and check on this weirdo cop who lives out there. He's like the ghost cop. And he walked away. And I spent the next day kind of those initial glimpses into one apex of the triangle, which was Freetown, and I became obsessed. And I met Alan Alves, who is the policeman he's referring to, who was not a ghost cop, but rather he was someone who was experiencing. And if you watch the documentary, you know who I'm talking about, Alan Alves. He had so much crime in this small town of Freetown that had some kind of occult tinge to it, and a ton of cult activity in this Freetown Fall River State Forest, that he had to become an expert in cult activity. And so this guy from this small little town in Massachusetts would be called all across the country to speak to officers who were having cult crimes in their towns, right? And I was like, oh, this is a book. I got to write this book. And I was commissioned to write the book. I was signed to write it. And as I'm working and researching, and I'm kind of publishing out there on my website the things that I'm finding, a whole bunch of people contacted me. Well, initially it was 4 people contacted me with very similar stories, all in the town of Freetown. And it was the basic story, and they were individualized, but the stories were the same. They were in the Freetown State Forest and doing this, that, or the other thing, and all of a sudden they came upon this little troll gnome-type creature in the forest. And he was about 3 feet tall, and their descriptions slightly varied. Most of them said he had kind of like an elongated nose, but essentially looked like, like a troll. Like, if you research the word Pukwudgie, I've never seen or heard anyone describe it the way that they describe it online. I've never seen that. The best way I can almost describe it is they looked more of like the dude from the little guy from the movie Labyrinth. That kind of like squished version of a person with a bigger nose. And all three of them said that they saw this person, and they kind of there was moments. It wasn't just like out of the corner of their eye. Like they made eye contact with it, and one way or another, this creature disappeared. And all of them then said, something like that you can push off. I don't know, it was a trick of light or whatever. All three of them then said that days later, and I think almost all of them said 3 days later, they saw that same creature at their house. Like, in other words, two of them, they said they literally, one woke up and it was next to their bed. Another one woke up and it was hovering outside of a second floor window, like staring at them. Another one was picking someone up, and saw, like picking up a friend, and saw the same creature in their rear view mirror staring at them. And all three of them, the ones that kind of had this secondary thing, all three of them described almost identically the feeling that they got, which was they were getting from this creature, I know where you live. You might know where I live. I definitely know where you live. Stay out of the forest. And they're asking me, what is this? And I'm like, I haven't the slightest idea. But I was getting these reports. And then I'd get other reports of, these seeing these small people in the forest and stuff. But these three people who had eye-to-eye contact in the forest all reported seeing that same creature in their house or in like some place that wasn't the forest days later, almost offering it a warning. So I'm at the time of doing a lot of research and I come across the book, which your audience might be familiar with, which is Passing Strange by Joe Citro.
Yep.
And in that book, there's one line where Joe is talking about the Dover Demon. And it says in there, and the Dover Demon is definitely not a Pukwudgie. Or doesn't seem to be a Pukwudgie. Something like that. And I was like, Joe, you're killing me, brother. Like, what's a Pukwudgie? Like, you can't just throw out a word like that. And then he had maybe a paragraph about Pukwudgies in another chapter later on in the book. And it was very brief, and it was basically, there's this Native American legend about these little people in the woods, and they're called Pukwudgies. Like, there was almost no information about it. But it was obvious that Joe had at least come across that word in his research. So I became obsessed with, like everyone else who hears the word, what the hell is a Pukwudgie? And so, being a librarian, or working in a library, I immediately started researching. And what I found was there was, at that time, so if you Google Pukwudgie now, you're going to see how extreme this has become. You would get one page of results, and every single reference was to a kid's book called The Good Giant and the Bad Pukwudgie. And so I got that book, right? I bought that book. And then at the end of that book, and literally the pictures in that book are exactly what people were telling me they were seeing in the woods. And I'm like, this is crazy. And then all of these kind of other details about them that were fitting in with other people were saying, these little balls of light, which I come to find out are called Taipaiwunkas, which are basically like orbs, right? Like they're ghost lights. Like they're supposed to be the souls of the people that the Pukwudgies have led to their death. And so they now have control over those spirits, and they use them to lure other people. And what I discovered was, in this book, in a very kid version way of it, that at some point, for reasons that weren't really sure, the Pukwudgies had gone from being kind of either neutral or just seen as being pesky to the Wampanoags to being overly aggressive and hating the Wampanoags and like burning their villages, kidnapping little kids, leading warriors out into the woods and then killing them, sometimes by pushing them off cliffs or stuff like that. Like, and the basic and a war was raged by Marshop, who's their creator god, who was responsible for kind of like babysitting these Pukwudgies, and he wasn't doing his job. And these Pukwudgies, and I'm like, oh my word, this is great. This is really interesting. You know, the Pukwudgies win, and now they're all over New England, and they spread. And at the back of that book, it said, this story comes from a longer tale, which is talked about in the book, The Narrow Lands. So I got that book, right? And as soon as, and it's the researcher in me, as soon as I get a book, like if it's folklore, if it's nonfiction, the very first thing I do is I go to the bibliography, and I tell the quality of a researcher by the size of their bibliography, right? And so immediately I started getting every single source that was in the narrow land that had to do with Pukwudgies. And I just started pushing all of that information out to people, even before the book was published. And what I found was that it's not just the name, and it's not just the idea that these small, trickster cryptids, ghosts, like we don't even have a name for what they really are. Elementals would probably be the best term. Every culture has them. And so it wasn't just that every culture has them and that the name was really cool. It's the fact that people were actually still having experiences with these things in New England. And they took off, right? No one had been talking about them before except for Joe Citro. I heard Lord Coleman said that he had talked about them before. But it was like the needle was at zero. And now, they're part of Harry Potter. They're in the Harry Potter universe. They're huge. I get like 5 or 6 videos a day on my feed that have to do with like the story of the Pukwudgies. And it's like I have literally watched the story of and the what a Pukwudgie is and what it looks like and what it does. I have watched it change so many times over the last 20 years that it's almost unrecognizable from the original Wampanoag legends and the legend I was able to kind of publish out, back in the early 2000s.
Mm. Now, going back real quick, Chris, you keep saying like if you Google Pukwudgie, you never heard of somebody describing the way the internet does. I kind of have it pulled up for those that may not have already searched it while listening to this. But so you kind of mentioned they're based off of Native American folklore with that tribe and stuff like
the
that.
Wampanoag.
So, thank you. And they talk as described as almost like a small human-like being, often with gray skin, large ears, sometimes with features resembling almost like a porcupine or a troll.
Never heard that before ever in my life until like recently.
And then it kind of ends with Pukwudgies are known for their mischievous and sometimes malicious nature with the ability to shapeshift, become invisible, and use poison arrows.
Yes, all of those things. Yeah, but if the crazy thing is that like, I have heard some crazy things in the last few years. If you imagine, I can't. I wish I could remember the name of the little guy in a labyrinth. That's what they looked like, and they sometimes had to skip. Now, over the years, one thing I have discovered is that Pukwudgie was a Native American term, which was kind of like an umbrella term. Like we might say monster and then you would say it was a werewolf, it was this, it was like, in other words, the Pukwudgie term was used for several different kinds of small creatures or small elemental things that were living in the woods. And so there is some variation. Like in New Hampshire, for example, there's this one cemetery which I had experienced, I think, pretty much at the same time this is happening. But this cemetery was known for having these same, very similar, 3 feet tall, longer, little bitch nose, and it was more covered in red hair, right? Or had a lot of red hair. And
Not
they
to
were
cut
once
you off
again,
real quick. Not to
yes,
cut you off real quick, Chris. But are you thinking of the labyrinth creature by the name? I think it's pronounced Wodo.
it's not the big one; it's the little one. It's the
Uh,
little gnome who's like trying to lead her through the labyrinth for the
I
Goblin
think
King. I think technically
yeah,
he's a
Ludo.
goblin in there.
I think it might be Ludo then. Ludo. I think.
I think Ludo's the big one because I think several times he goes, "Ludo, smell bad." Like
Oh,
I think
okay, maybe.
I think it's the other one. Everyone in your audience will know, or they'll at least be like searching it up and they'll know it 100%. But it's yeah, it's
Hoggle?
the little one. Hoggle. There you go. There you go. That was, the original descriptions I was getting were like that, and sometimes with spiky hair. That spiky hair became porcupine quills. So I don't know where that happened. I think that has something to do with the fact that they shapeshift. I have never in my life ever talked to anyone who's seen one. Nowhere in my research was the word claws ever used, and yet now it's got these vicious claws. It's like drooling, like it looks more like a chupacabra now to some people. I've heard in the past year, I've heard things like there are Pukwudgie human hybrids because they would take wampanogs out and sexually assault them and impregnate them. I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, I've never heard that. And all of these kinds. So what it is, I think, is that we have this idea. It's kind of like what we were talking about before. We have this idea, and the Pukwudgie is such a good blank slate because there are different variants of it for everything that we're scared of about these small little creatures. That we've made it more and more and more vicious in terms of its physical appearance than it ever was in any lore or any account I've ever taken of one who's had an interaction with it. And, that's kind of, oddly enough, however much it annoys me that she brought it into folklore, into Harry Potter lore, William the Pukwudgie is probably much more what the actual Pukwudgies were like than the vicious one you see with the porcupine quills like flying out of it that you get in, deviant art and all of the images that you see.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it's almost like they changed it to like their own, to like almost like a, do I dare say like a modern take, not staying true to the, like how you worded it before, like with the Native American folklore.
And where the need comes from. And I think it's one of those things that, once it was out there and once the legend was kind of reborn and reintroduced to a modern audience, I think what happened is that people would read like half the story and then they'd take certain elements of it, and then when they retold it, it's like, the classic way that folklore changes anyway. Like this idea of, you hear one part and then you go like, your audience isn't responding, so you make it a little bit more vicious, but it's still true to the spirit. And if that happens over the course of time, especially with how quickly social media can move it now, it just becomes more a reflection of what we need it to be than what it actually was when I first started reporting it.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to Pukwudgie, like I almost felt like the first time I heard about them, like these little guys and just coming to basically lure you to your death, almost in a strange way. I almost felt like there were certain element to them that kind of reminded me of the Changoan, where they would lure people and almost basically switch
Yeah,
bodies. I think is what it was really, where one they would return home for the example, depending on who it was. For the example, I'll just say maybe the wife notices that the husband is no longer their husband, and they think now, oh my God, a Changoan got him. It's almost like they knew, like the
yeah,
Changoan came in to be, and now it's like, uh, I forget now. I know it's like 48, 72 hours, maybe a week. I kind of forget how it goes, but I know they got that time frame now to get the real husband back before basically, they're gone forever.
yeah. So most of the changeling lore involves babies, and newborn babies are young children, and the idea is that what they would do is they would switch the kid out, and
That's
they
what it
would
was.
bring the kid to their land, their lair. And they were fairies essentially, like, and they could use that time period to get the baby to either eat something or to drink something that would have them stay in that fairy realm. And then over time, they could manipulate it to actually become a fairy. And because it was small children, it was a lot easier to tempt them. And they would leave a fairy as as like a doppelganger of the baby, so that the parents wouldn't notice.
Right.
And so you would often and then of course the changeling itself, once the job was finished, would kind of like jump out of the crib or whatever to reveal its true self and then disappear into the woods. So you did have this kind of idea of kidnapping Wampanoags, but especially Wampanoag babies and children, but it's really unclear what their motivation was for that. Like, there weren't a lot of reports of in the folklore of kids who had come back to report about what the Pukwudgies were like. And there is some kind of there's different theories about whether they can vanish or whether there is a Pukwudgie realm, and that there's some kind of gateway or portal between Pukwudgie world and our world, and they just slip through that, do what they need to do, and then slip back in. So in that way, it is kind of like a changeling. But the difference is that a Pukwudgie never made itself and would never want to be in your home for an extended period of time. Like, those were like interactions that were very fast, that were to warn you that they are people of the woods. They want to be in the woods. And, I really felt that at the time, the reason why people were having more and more Pukwudgie experiences, especially in Freetown, was this kind of tearing away of the forest. And
Mm.
so where they were able to kind of peacefully live, the balance was much more of like it, towards what it really, really old times was, which was, we acknowledge that you're there, don't mess with us, we won't mess with you. That was being impeded upon, and so therefore they were offering these warnings to keep people out of the woods. So their motivation for doing what they do now in modern times, is very dramatically different. But they don't want to be in your house. They want you to be in your house. They want you gone, and they want the forest to reclaim your house. But they don't want to like exchange lives with you for any amount of time. So that would be the big difference between a changeling and a Pukwudgie.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, the way I also looked at it too, with the way they warn you, is because maybe even if you weren't trying to tear down the fall or the forest per se, well, maybe you kind of got too close to their homestead, I guess, for a lack of word here,
Yeah,
where
exactly.
you're kind of getting too close to the comfort of them, where it's almost like if you know where they are, That's why they want to send you that warning, like, hey, you come back here, face the consequences. Whereas, like, hey, where we are. Don't tell anybody else. We'll leave you
Yeah,
alone,
I
kind
mean,
of thing. That's the way you were saying it.
exactly. Yeah, and you don't find Pukwudgies in Boston. You don't find them in cities. You don't find them in they are a rural woods-based creature. It's interesting because there's this woman out there, girl out there who, she's a woman who calls herself the Pukwudgie Whisperer, who
Mm.
attacks me a lot online because when I first started publishing these, I used the word demon.
Oh.
And part of the reason why I used the word demon was that word is used in the lore, right?
You
Because
mean
keep in
war
mind,
as in like the Native American? You mean?
yeah, but
Okay.
keep in mind that these would then be, if you know the history of the Wampanoag, you know, the Plymouth Bay Colony and the Mass Bay Colony, they really worked heavily on Christianizing
Oh,
the
yeah.
Pukwudgie, and so what you had were a whole variant of of the Wampanoag who were known as praying Indians, and these Wampanoag legends are being told by them, so they become a slightly Christianized, right? But the other idea is that if you go through, and this is why I defend my use of the word demon, if you go through the lore of demons in every culture, you get away from the Christian connotations of what a demon is, and what the media and movie versions of what a demon is, and Zach Baggins thinking everything is a demon. If you put that stuff aside and look at what mythology and folklore has labeled a demon over the years, that's what a Pukwudgie is the closest thing to. And I was reading the Field Guide of Demons when I started doing a lot of this research, and there's a whole section of this reference book, which are demons of the woods. And every characteristic of a Pukwudgie was so much more closely in tune with what these authors and what this centuries of folklore had labeled a demon than it was anything else. You know what I'm saying? It's like, some people want to call it a cryptid, and it's like, well, it kind of is, but I don't think it, and it's not a ghost, even though it can disappear and it's not quite there. I mean, the best definition for it was an elemental or demon. And so I felt very comfortable using that word in my original writings, and I get lambasted online all the time for it. And it's like, no, man, like that's literally what the folklore says.
Right. Yeah, you're just going off of what it said, what the original text said of how they proclaimed them as they were, and through their eyes, or through
Right, and going by the
Mhm.
non-Christian definition of what a demon is as well.
Right, which nowadays, yeah, what isn't in that term, that term anymore,
Yeah,
without having to, yeah,
but what the people don't understand is that I was doing all that writing and that research and publishing about that long before every television show had to use that word to get the audience's ears perked up. Like, I
obvious.
wasn't using it in a fantastical kind of way. I was using it in dude, there's like 27 different things in this book that all sound like Pukwudgies from all these different cultures and time periods, and the chapter is literally labeled "Demons of the Woods." So, like, I felt comfortable doing it. So, and I defend it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Just to kind of clarify too, to kind of go back to what you're saying too, like they're not usually wanting to be in your home or found in cities. I just want to say real quick too for the audience is like if you're curious of at least two locations that I can find at the moment besides New England in general, but Chris was talking about Massachusetts. We're sort of talking about the Bridgewater Triangle aspect, which I think these two places actually fall inside of the area of the triangle anyway. Chris here can confirm confirm it better than I could. But they also say that the Pukwudgies here are basically tied to places like the Hockomock Swamp and the Freetown State Forest.
So I would say, and again, I think that this is a real basis of contention. Freetown State Forest, 100%, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had never, ever, ever heard of a Pukwudgie in the Hockomock. The closest thing that I would say is a swamp-based Pukwudgie maybe is people who have seen the documentary and heard the story of Mr. Russo, and I believe his name is Steve Russo, but I could be wrong about the first name. And he has probably the most infamous account of an interaction with a Pukwudgie. So if you've watched the documentary, it's the Iwanchu incident, where the Pukwudgie was underneath a street light and kind of trying to lure him away, him and his dog. And he's written on it. I might have the first name wrong, but I know the last name is Russo. And he's written a book about it as well. He has his own book about it. Now that is near the Hockomock Swamp. So where he was is at the very edge, and of course, what is the Hockomock is ill-defined in terms of like the swamp begins right at this spot. But there were not like you hear now, like they're just running around the Hockomock. Now I had never heard that for years, never heard that. And a fellow researcher named Kristen Good and I, who really look into, because we've been doing it so long, the evolution of these stories in the Triangle, trying to track down like where do these things change, and we're unsure of where all of a sudden they became really, really swampy things. Other than probably 4 or 5 years ago now, it's been a while. There was a podcast called Bridgewater, and Misha Collins from Supernatural and Aaron Menke, who made the Lore podcast, they collaborated on this radio play during the lockdown, right, during the COVID lockdown. And they created this podcast, which is a fictional story of a police officer whose father is, taken, mysteriously disappears. And in that story, they lean heavy onto the idea of Pukwudgies being in the swamp and luring people to the Hockomock and trying to kill them there and having rituals in there. And I think that the popularity of that podcast has kind of pushed forth the idea that there's a ton of them in the Hockomock, or that they're connected to the Hockomock, where in reality, in all of my research, they never were.
I guess so. From your research, Chris, how would you describe like should I say like the colonization of the Pukwudgie? Like are they pretty? Are they pretty? Do they have a good sized group? Do they just only have a few? Like, what have you encountered? I guess how? Yeah.
Yeah, there's very little lore about like a Pukwudgie village. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Get that they live together, and they live in small groups together. Now, one of the stories is that they used to overrun Massachusetts, like in the Cape Cod, where the Bridgewater Triangle is essentially. They were overrunning that area. And then Mashop, who's the creator god, was told, like, you got to do something. They're all over the place. And so what he did was he didn't want to kill them. And so he went out and he shook them. He picked them up in his huge hand and he shook them to confuse them. And then he threw them as far away as he could. And so they landed in all of these other places in New England, some places in Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that they were so confused, they weren't able to find their way back, and they settled there. And so I always think of it more as like little pockets of Pukwudgies rather than like a Pukwudgie village or a huge community. And so, that's as much. I wouldn't even be able to put a number on it. In my mind, at least, I always think there's no more than like 10 Pukwudgies in an area. But I think that's more of just my imagination than anything specifically connected to anything that's in the folklore.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, for somebody that's not familiar with Pukwudgies as much as like you would, which is why I would sort of pick you to talk to me about a Pukwudgie anyway. So yeah, but I know usually you do hear sometimes, at least as far as from what I sort of recall when it comes to Pukwudgies, is usually if, let's say for the example, somebody does get disrespected them, they almost kind of like gang up on this individual. And maybe they use the poison arrow, poison dart that I even hear. But again, this might be the modern. This might not actually be like the.
And I think it's a little bit of the mixing. So what happened? What happened? The lore talks about how they would have these bow and arrows and they would shoot the arrows, right?
Right.
And how, but those never seemed to be particularly aimed at humans. They were just like shot. And I think maybe they might have been more of like a warning, or at least like they were trying to kill something to eat. I don't know. But like, I still remember the book, it goes ba-ding, like every time that the arrows would go off. Then what happened was when Mashop was finally told, like, you've got to get these guys, you've got to destroy them. He goes out with his 5 sons. And when he goes out with his 5 sons, this is a really good example of how, like, folklore gets, like, mixed and matched, right?
Right.
When he goes out, him and his 5 sons, and actually he sent his 5 sons out first, they all get killed through magic darts and poison dust. And then when Mashop goes out, he gets attacked with these poison darts and this dust. And so I think over time, and by over time I mean like the last 15, 20 years, I think what happens is the two things are combined in that they have poison arrows. Mm-hmm. But I have never heard any connection between like them poisoning like someone with a dart or shooting them with an arrow. Mm-hmm. Based on kind of what the real mythology is of them, and what and like things that I've heard, like in conjunction with people who have experiences, might be something more. They're much more likely to like poison your water supply or taint your water supply than they are to and I would say taint your water supply, not poison it somehow to make the water bad so you'd want to leave, more than actually attack you with poison weapons.
I was just about to ask, like, in a way, like when you were first mentioning like poison in your water, you mean like to have you hallucinate? Is what I was going to originally ask you.
No, yeah, I think more of like to make it bad. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
To like sour the water so that you wanted to leave.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because what better way to make it so that if you basically get rid of the good, you're kind of forced to leave because it's no longer like good soil, good environment per se.
Yeah, and I think that also even in the descriptions of it, both the physical descriptions, the way that they act sometimes, if we look at them and you think of it as there's something weird, so like kind of what we were talking about before. Think of it as like there's something weird going on in the woods, and people are having these weird experiences, and then you try to come up with a story as to what that is. Pukwudgies are just a reflection of Wampanoags, and so when they would talk about them, and and if it was groups of them, their closest frame of reference would be a village, and so they might talk about it like a village. You know what I'm saying? Or like a
Yeah.
scouting party. And so they would associate them with a scouting party. And so they would, talk about them reflective of what they knew. But to be honest with you, I can't even, maybe in Wilton, Massachusetts, Wilton, New Hampshire, there have been more than one reported in the same place. But other than that, every Pukwudgie story in New England, at least, it's a solitary Pukwudgie. Like I said, Wilton, this area known as Gravend Cemetery, which is kind of infamous for them. That's where the red variant is, and also in Indiana, in a place called Mound State Park. People have reported multiple ones at the same time there. But other than that, it's always a single one, like in modern stories.
Right. Now, forgive me, Chris. Now, is this because they're solo? Because do they just not get along with each other, or do you just think like they're just better off just being by themselves? Like I don't even know how a good way to even.
Yeah, I think because of in those two places, I would say if there's a community, that Mound State Park and Gravend Cemetery, the woods near Gravend, are very specific places where if there was like a tribe or a group of them, that's where they would live, as opposed to all of the other accounts, like live accounts, like first-hand accounts of seeing them. You're stumbling upon one. And so it's not like Rip Van Winkle where you stumble upon the whole village of them. You're stumbling upon a solitary one, and so there is no backup that there are other ones in the area because you've only seen the one that you stumble upon, who then revisits you to offer you the warning.
That makes sense. Okay, Chris. Well, I guess to wrap up this Pukwudgie segment, because I feel like it has gone longer than what I thought it would go into initially be, but that's fine.
I told you I'm long-winded, brother.
Yo, dude, I love it. I told you, I love listening to this. But anyway, I guess for the last thing I want to touch on with the Pukwudgie is, so from what you've encountered too, like. Maybe you might have encountered somebody that actually been, actually lured, attacked, whatever. But like, if I walked into the woods and I showed, let's just say, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Let's just say I somehow disrespected the forest. I think because from everything it sounds like they're basically nature's creatures. Like they respect the earth, everything about it. As we were kind of saying before, like if you start knocking down trees, then they're gonna give you that warning basically. So I guess for the example here is like let's just say I did something to disrespect them. And now they're trying to come after me. Now, is there some sort of way that I could, I guess I would say, protect myself, like have a defense against them, like besides just running away?
Nope. There would not be. Don't go in the forest anymore.
Don't go in the forest anymore. Yep.
Yeah. So, I've told this story before, so maybe some people in your audience have heard it, but years ago, probably like 16, 17 years ago now, I was contacted by the people from the TV show Paranormal State.
Oh, okay.
And they had a case in Massachusetts, and they had connected with a local investigator who strongly believed that what was in these people's house was a Pukwudgie. And this is probably the single most important moment in the history of Pukwudgies, because this is what really brought them to the mass audience, right? Because that was a very popular show at the time. And so they wanted me to come on the show as a consultant. And I couldn't do that because I was living in Florida now. And so they interviewed me, and then at the end of the episode, they and I was interviewed by one person. At the end of the episode, they are having like a council, and they're all sitting around a speaker box, and they're talking to me. Even though I only talked to one person on the show, if you watch it, it looks like I'm speaking with them in real time. At this meeting of what are they going to do next, right? Beauty of television. And
Right.
so I'm talking, and the guy I'm talking with over the phone says to me, "How do you get rid of a Pukwudgie?" And I say, "You can't." Right? I'm like, the same thing I just said to you. I'm like, all you do is like just don't go in the woods. Like it'll go away. Like with most fairy type things, like you just avoid it, you ignore them, stuff like that. Like they go away. And he said, because there's this part in the lore of folklore, the folklore of the Pukwudgies that talks about their love of strawberry bread.
Strawberry bread. That's
strawberry bread, and not strawberry cake, not strawberry pie, not strawberry shortcake, strawberry bread, and a little bit strawberries. And so he says to me, this random person who's interviewing me says, "Well, what about if you plant a strawberry tree, like a strawberry bush, right?" And I said, "A strawberry bush? No, like why would you do that? That's like, like you are. Why would you plant something that intentionally would bring them to your house? Like if they like strawberries,
that's almost like an invitation to dinner.
Yeah, that's like when people say I use alcohol in my rituals, and I'm surprised why I keep getting these drunk ghosts. Like, well, that's because it's attracting drunks, like in death, So it's like you wouldn't draw, right. But I could tell, like being savvy enough. And having been on TV shows before and stuff, I'm like, oh, he wants the visual of them planting the strawberry bush, right? Like, he wants that active thing of like the dramatic music playing and then planting the bush. And so I say, we'll go on my host spiel about like how it's not, like I don't think it's a good idea at all. And I go like, but who knows? You could always plant a strawberry bush. When they replay the episode, someone who's not the person who asked me the question, I think on a TV show, it's actually Michelle Belanger asks the question, "How do you get rid of a Pukwudgie?" And the voice over the speakerphone says, "Get rid of a Pukwudgie, plant a strawberry bush."
Oh no!
Almost immediately, like within the next month, online, the entire mythology and history of the Pukwudgie changes to everything saying, if you see a Pukwudgie, immediately plant a strawberry bush. I mean, it was like crazy to see. Like you're talking about 500 years of folklore wiped away on one episode of television.
Wow.
And so that's kind of now the standing narrative of like, if you want to get rid of them, plant a strawberry bush.
In other words, don't always believe everything that is on TV, kids.
Yeah, and then you have to think like, I never tackle the question of whether a story is true or not true, right? Like It's always, this is the belief system of the people spreading the story. And people say to me all the time, well, is it a ghost then? And I'm like, do you think it's a ghost? If you think it's a ghost, then live with that. Like, I'm not here to prove or disprove the paranormal. Like that's someone else's job. So if you think about it in terms of like how we tell ghost stories, we can say something like never believe what you see on television, but keep in mind that every ghost story to some degree is like that, right? Like it just has changed differently. I specialize in urban legends, and back in the day, urban legends changed or were spread through fax machines. People were faxing each other these stories that then became, whatever. And they were being told over campfires. And then they were being told on email blasts, right? And then they were being told on, and so now, we can spread them faster because our way of communicating is faster. But I don't think it's any more dishonest, although that seems pretty dishonest, the whole strawberry bush thing. But like in general, I don't think it's any more dishonest than it ever has been. It's just that stories change over years and over the needs of the audience and the needs of the storyteller. And so we're just seeing like an amped up version of that.
That makes sense. Almost like nowadays with the creepy pastas and whatever else that is going on. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a whole thing. I do a program for teens, and what I talk about are classic urban legends and their modern versions, right?
Right.
But then the fact that all throughout Florida, and you could probably find this pretty much everywhere, um, ghost stories change based on things like creepypasta, and they get mixed and matched, and you hear one thing here. So a really good example would be on the campus of the University of Florida. There
Mm-hmm.
is this the Beatty Tower, right? And the urban legend is that in the 1960s, a local girl, so a local Gainesville, Florida, really small town girl, went to the university. She tried acid for the first time. She thought she could fly, and she jumped from the 13th floor, the roof of Beatty Tower, right? Never happened, by the way. Um, and this story became so famous that people have seen her ghost, and people who are in that dorm, they'll tell you they've seen her walking the halls of the 12th floor, getting in the elevator, like all this stuff. They say, although there's a discrepancy on this too, they say that it was the inspiration for the song American Girl by Tom Petty, who is from Gainesville, right? And he heard the story, and he wrote American Girl about this urban legend. So especially like the second verse of that song talks about being up high and like hearing the traffic going by, and all of these kind of characteristics of her. And so this is like, over however long this has been kind of an ingrained urban legend. Um, Recently, however, there's been this rise in popularity thanks to creepypasta, to Ghosts in Your Machine, which is an amazing website. Um, TV shows like Fear, not Fear, but Evil. This idea of the elevator game. And the basic concept of the elevator game is that you hit numbers in a certain sequence in a building, in an elevator. And by doing that, you kind of trigger this dimensional change. And when you finally get out of the elevator, you're in like the upside down, like from Stranger Things. And
Mm.
you have an hour to explore, and then you have to get back in the elevator, and you have to do everything in reverse to get back to the original, your dimension.
Your timeline or
Exactly, your
plane.
timeline. And if you don't, you get lost forever, blah, blah, blah. Well, that story is being told in Beatty Tower, right? So it's one of those things where like the urban legend became a ghost story. The ghost story maybe became a song, which became an urban legend that the song was about it, which until finally modern things like creepypasta and TikTok have now made it that you have to do the elevator game. It's most effective to do in places like Beatty Tower, which already have a haunted history.
That makes sense. So this kind of reminds me of you may have heard of it, Chris, but it's a movie and quote legend, I guess, from Korea, I believe. It's known as the Bridge Curse is the movie name. It's also a video game and stuff like that for people that may know this. But yeah, it's two movies. It's called the Bridge Curse and on both of them, like Bridge Curse, and then there's the Bridge Curse 2 or something like that. But in the second movie, it has like how you just described the elevator game, where it's
Yeah.
just dimensional realm where basically well, in this case, from what I could gather with this bridge curse aspect, is the living wasn't really supposed to find it, I guess, and it instead of having like an hour to explore, it pretty much short-lived is what I should say. But then again, maybe because of it being a movie, they had to shrink it down to make it seem like you don't have much time.
Yeah.
I guess. But that's what that sort of reminds me of when you say that.
Yeah, and those things
Mhm.
that we're constantly borrowing. We're borrowing from the folklore because it's now so easy to get it, and because I have, like I said, I teach teenagers, right? And I
Mhm.
can tell you that there is a large section of teenagers, both middle school and high school, especially early high school, that are obsessed with anime. And they're obsessed with anything that kind of touches upon, Asian culture. And so that's where you have something, like, which is British, which is like the Blue Whale, the Blue Whale Club, which is this whole thing where you're supposed to do all these series of activities, the last of which is taking your own life. That becomes kind of shifted to
Occultist?
the Momo challenge because of people's obsession with Asian culture nowadays, with the youth's obsession with Asian culture.
Mm.
So a
Yeah,
lot of
that
those
huh.
Japanese and Korean and Chinese old folk stories, which are often told in anime form, get are now a huge influence on, like, the folklore of modern America, especially as a TikTok video goes from just being someone talking about it to a whole bunch of people talking about it to it seeping into other social media that old people like me are into, to actually impacting a legend.
I guess I could give an example of almost like the I forget how you actually pronounce the name because of me being part deaf, but like it's almost like that famous area in Japan, the suicide forest.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the interesting thing is that there are some people. There are three different locations just in Florida that, over the time that I have been studying haunted legends here,
Mhm.
that folklore has been directly impacted by the popularity of that Japanese forest.
Really?
So that these places, one of which is Ormond Beach, Florida, and a place known as the Fairchild Oak, which is called the Suicide Oak. Another one is the Oviedo Lights, which is probably Florida's most infamous haunted legend, which is a classic. Like, people used to literally, people in the 50s and 60s, instead of going on dates, would go to this bridge and watch these ghost lights fly all over the place. Um,
That's
and
interesting.
one small element of that was that a man coming home from World War II to find that his wife had, or his girlfriend, had married someone else while he was off at war, went to the bridge and took his own life. And that was,
Mm.
for years, that was an element of the story. Like, in terms of, like, in the 50s and 60s, like, that was part of the story. Once the popularity, over, like, maybe the last 10 years, once the popularity of that force in Japanese went up, the story got shifted to these places in Florida, which have these little pockets of stories that involve someone taking their life at a location, became, and then a whole bunch of people would be compelled to go there and take their own life. And so all of these things that you're seeing are the result of, multiple suicides in one area, because it became known as someplace where people do that. And I've seen that rise based on the popularity of that Japanese forest.
So, if I may, Chris, just step in for a minute. So, have you seen any other similarities, I guess, from the suicide forest to Florida? And what I mean by that is like, you know how they say sometime when you go to this forest, you'll find rope, some sort of line per se. Could be even be ribbon. I think from what I even hear, but rope is mainly the main one. But it's almost like the person that goes there with this rope basically know they're gonna die, and whereas at the end of the at the end of the rope is where you're gonna find the quote the dead, unfortunately the body. Is there any sort of similarity to that, like, or what's another one that I hear about the suicide forest? Oh, uh, stay on the trail, because
Yeah.
otherwise, if you go off the trail, supposedly the spirits of the wood will get you.
Yeah, so the elements that are the same in all of these kinds of places, and it's just like in the Freetown State Forest, you have the Assonet Ledge, which has a very similar legend to it. We did a whole episode on Walking Sam, which is the on the reservation. If I get this wrong, please don't be angry with me, your audience. But I'm pretty sure it happened. It's the reservation where Wounded Knee was. Um, and it's this same kind of idea that there's something these areas, whether it's these initial suicides or whatever, that has tainted it so that there's a temptation, even for people who are not suicidal, to get overwhelmed with feelings. And oftentimes, in all those places I just named, one of the things that's similar is someone starts to whisper to you all the reasons why you should take your own life. And you seem to be overcome by despair. So, in theory, someone of completely fine mental health can go into these areas and they get almost manipulated and possessed into actually taking their own lives. That's a theme that I've seen in a lot of these different places.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
in almost all of them, um, in all of them that I can think of, the the next part of that story is that now you, as the person who has taken your life, are now part of the story, and you're walking the woods, drawing other people in.
Right. Almost like you're that. I don't know if should say conductor, but in a way you are, because you're putting off that energy to for almost like a feeder, like you're feeding
Right,
it.
right. And so, like for the Oviedo Lights, they say, Oviedo's right outside Orlando. They say that the reason why there's so many lights that are seen there is because so many people have gone to see the Oviedo Lights, or the most popular version of it is that you take your girlfriend there, you watch the lights for a little bit, and then you try a little hanky panky. And when you're not now paying attention, the lights come and they kill you. Or you are inspired by the story and you also take your life at the bridge, and now you become a light. You become one of these orbs that people are coming to see. And so that kind of idea is talked about in all of these different locations like that.
Now, what about has anybody tried to say, like, these lights that you speak of, they're just nothing more than like Chinese lights or Chinese lanterns? My bad.
Yeah, I mean, sure, like, and swamp gas and all that stuff. Like every
Yes.
explanation you can have. Now, as far as I know, like swamp gas can't follow you down a road and change speed. It can't fly up into the air. It can't like dance with another one and change direction and switch. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, all of the typical scientific reasons are there, and maybe that's why it is. Like, there's one place that's kind of near that Fairchild Oak that I was talking about, and they're called the Tomoka Lights, and they were like, "Oh, well, we changed the bridge. We took the bridge down and we shifted it because of erosion, and since we shifted it, there's no more Tomoka Lights." And that proves that it was something completely natural, because when we change the angle that people go in, they no longer see the lights. So it must have been something natural. But the paranormal person can easily come back and say, well, no, you changed the environment. By changing the environment, you changed the energy. You may have just dispelled the energy that was there, or refocused the energy that was there. So I think there's always, in any of these places, you have like the total, scientific or natural
Effect of the
explanation
environment. Yeah.
that can always come against it. So I was telling you earlier, I think about the haunted school, right?
Hmm.
So
Right.
I was doing a tour on Christmas, like it's actually on Christmas. I didn't have my kids, and I was going back to the old song that says we were telling creepy ghost stories on Christmas, and so I did a tour on Christmas. It was actually like it was packed, right? A whole bunch of people went on it, and one of the people that went on it was my assistant principal. And we get to the Gwynn School, which is technically owned by the Lee County School Department, right? Lee County School System. And so she's like, I used to work in this building. And I'm like, really? Really? She said, yeah. And she said she was watching a kid. It's kind of like this one area is like a split level stairs. She said she was watching a kid, and all of a sudden, his back like kind of bowed, right? As if someone was pushing him in the back, and he fell down the stairs. And
Interesting.
later when she talked to him, he said, she's like, oh, you tripped. And he's like, no, I felt something push me from behind, and that's why I fell down the stairs. And so she's on the tour, she's telling me this story, and there's like 20 people, we're in a group. And I say to her, so do you think it was a ghost? And she said to me, well, he was wearing kind of baggy pants, so maybe the wind took him. If there's no better example of, like, I don't want to believe that ghosts are real, that, like, someone's pants were so baggy they fell down the stairs when you clearly saw him being pushed by unseen hands. Denial, right? So, yes, there's always an explanation that might make sense that doesn't have to do with the supernatural, but oftentimes it's even more ridiculous than actually believing ghosts are real.
Well, to be fair, I think for some people, they always seem to try to find that logical explanation, something that something that the brain can definitely identify. I think that would be the correct term of saying that. Whereas, like, going back to your story, if these invisible hands that push this person, we don't. It's almost like the person doesn't want to admit that because that's not. It's almost like saying Bigfoot's not real. That's not supposed to exist. I know that's like a different topic, but it still works for this in this example. Whereas, like, you hear it from a lot of eyewitnesses that have seen one or a claim. I mean, I'm not saying every single person is trying to get their 15 minutes of fame. I'm just trying to say, like, they're when you hear the eyewitness say that when they saw it, they kind of froze, and it's almost like their brain was trying to figure out what they're seeing.
Trying to process it,
yeah, they're trying to process it. It's because our brain is trying to find that one familiar aspect to basically say this is what it is.
Yeah, and one of the other elements of it is that if you look over the past 20 years, 25 years, and you look at the way that the paranormal field has changed, one of the trademarks of what it was to be a good investigator back in the day was to be critical, right? And that's that's the rise of the word debunk, which is like my most hated word in the English language. And this idea that and the origins of it, we can say, are from a genuine place, right? Like, if you take away everything that is a possible explanation,
what are you left with?
Then you're left with, okay, it's not. But if you go into a house, they're saying there's cold spots, and you find that there's a draft in that area because of something they can't see, like, that's helpful, right? And so that became a practice, and a good practice, right? Like, eliminate the other explanations for it, and then let's deal with what doesn't have an explanation. Then you're left with what might be a ghost. I think over time that became, I can name so many different things that aren't a ghost or why it's not a ghost, and the more that I can name, the the smarter I am, right?
You mean like
And so
like? Mm-hmm.
if you look at like ghost photography, right? If you look at like taking pictures of ghosts,
Oh
um,
yeah.
there, any picture, if you post a picture and say, "What do you guys think?" You will have every person and their mother coming out and telling you all the different reasons why this is not a picture of a ghost. And the more that you can put forward, the more it used to be, the more you were being helpful. Now it's like the more you're proving how good you are and how smart you are. And then it gets to a point where it's like, and then it can also just be faked, right? And I can tell it's a fake because of this, and so everything is fake because being able to point out a fake is now a badge of honor. And so people spend so much time trying to kill anything that might be evidence anyone puts forward that that it's changed its original origin. That's part of the reason why I'm like, dude, I know what I experienced. I know what had happened to me. You can say whatever you want. You're never going to convince me it didn't happen because I was there when it happened. And so I didn't want to play with trying to prove not to the world, but to other investigators that what I had was genuine. And so it was like, well, you know what? Okay, well, you're in a location for 2 hours and you didn't have anything happen, yet you're ready to stamp it like not haunted, whereas these people have lived there for 10 years and they have something happen all the time. Like, who am I going to believe, right? And so that's part of the reason why I became a legend tripper, what I do now, as opposed to investigator, because I didn't feel the need to prove it anymore. But it was also this idea of like, you've lost sight of what you're doing. You've lost the awe of the paranormal because you're trying to prove how smart you are in being able to, say why it's not a ghost and not embracing the idea that it could be.
Yeah. I get what you're saying, and I think that this can also fall into the category of nowadays with AI, what is real and what is fake.
Right. So, I mean, why even try, right? Why even try to present evidence anymore? Like,
yeah. Like you're saying, I mean, you're going to get hackled on it anyway. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I used to do because I forget who told me it. Maybe it was one of my friends from the old paranormal group that I am good friends with. But anyway, he always told me if you take a picture, always take another one. Because if the first one shows up something that looks odd and weird, make sure to take another one right after because maybe you can go back and compare both photos to see if it any practice. Yeah. Like I forget how we worded it, but basically it's like a go back to see if there's any like what changed, what stayed the same. I think that's how he was looking at it. But I mean, going back
and always like I mean, I literally wrote a book called Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film. No, it's called Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film. It was one publisher's version of like dummy guides, and so they asked me to write an investigator one. That's called Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting. Not my choice on the title. And then the second one was Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film. And keeping in mind that was, 15 years ago, it's so outdated, but it was like, it has all these different best practices. Well, you can take that book and you can like burn it, right? Because you can, if your idea is to then present that information to anybody, there are 1,000 ways that it could be faked. And if you're looking at someone's picture, again, there's like, 1,000 ways it can be fake. So are ghost pictures even worth it anymore? And so much is about intent. I had a girl on the tour about 2 weeks ago, and I was showing her some of the pictures that we've gotten from this one location. And in addition to that, some people on the tour were literally getting pictures and showing me in the moment, like, do you think this is something? And she was like, first of all, I thought it was interesting. She said, I'm an atheist, so I don't believe in that. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure how atheism fits in with this, but I got you. you're like 22, you hate everything in the world. I got it. And she was talking about how, you want to see a ghost so much you convince yourself you can do it. And I'm like, you are 100% correct. First of all, why are you on a ghost tour then? Right? Why are you on a haunted history tour? And secondly, like, I 100% understand it. And yet, you would be surprised how many pictures of that same window I get, and I can see, like, okay, I get it. Like, you're seeing that. These were ones that, like, really stood out. And she's like, yeah, but you probably faked them. And I'm like, okay, next location. Right? Like, there was no way that I was going to convince her
this
or
person.
allow her to have a good time, right? So it was like, so instead I'm just going to, like, move on to the next thing. And if you don't like it, just think of these as really creepy and weird history stories. But, if you want it to not be a ghost picture or evidence or an EVP or whatever, like, it's gonna not, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that kind of falls into what I was saying earlier when we were talking about with the Burden house, where, like, what if somebody came in with a different energy, whereas in this case, this lady that clearly was having a bad week or something, uh, you know, this goes into what I was kind of basically asking, like, like, let's just say she went into the Woody Burden house. She's not gonna produce that same happy-go-lucky energy for kids. Instead, she's gonna be drawing that negativity that is. Do I dare say now supposedly there? I mean, I don't know. I just know
Yeah.
that there is a show that where this guy was talking about how he was recreating the crime scene, and he would by himself, and I think he said something to the effect of, like, when he tried to go to bed, he was, like, attacked by like a floating knife that was from the kitchen or something like that. Like, he
Yeah.
physically got hurt. But so in that case, it's almost like, well, he kind of caused that because he literally started to recreate the crime scene all over again.
And
So
for a while, one of the popular ideas, and so one of the popular things that people would do when they went to Lizzie Borden was the idea that Andrew Borden had molested Lizzie and had molested the other sister. And
which is
so,
why she supposedly killed them, right? That was
right.
like one of the stories or something. I don't know if
So
that
this,
how true that is. Yeah.
yeah, we don't know how true that is, but probably about 10, 15 years ago, that became a very popular idea in the Lizzie Borden story. And so a lot, and once again, pushed forward by television shows, right?
Mm-hmm.
People would go into the Lizzie Borden house, and they would immediately start to antagonize the ghost, what they thought would be the ghost of Andrew Borden, by accusing him of being a child molester and yelling at him about playing with his daughters and stuff like that, and then they would have very negative interactions, right? Like, negative things would happen, and of course they're provoking because it looks really good on camera. Like, the negative stuff looks really good on camera, right?
Right.
But their intent going in was reflected in their paranormal experience. Now, you can say that's because you have the experience you want, or you can say the energy you give to whatever might be there just gets bounced back at you, right? You can kind of do it either way. But that's another example of, like, what you were bringing in ends up being exactly what you experienced. So this woman, I mean, she was only, like, just slightly out of being a teenager. Her intent was to, like, be really smart to her friend. To be like, and she literally was ruining the tour for other people because her and her friend just kept laughing because he'd be like, "Oh, you see how he said it again," da, 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 that kind of stuff. And I get that. So I would be very interested to see what would happen if, like, I took her to a genuinely engulfing, encompassing kind of paranormal place like the Ocala National Forest, and been like, okay, now let's just start just 100% from scratch. Let's go to this area where this crazy stuff has happened and see if you experience anything. And if you really are open minded, because you're saying you're like, I don't believe in this, I don't believe in that. If you really like are open minded, then just offer up the opportunity that maybe it exists, and let's see what happens. So, but I would charge her so much more money for that.
Well, of course, yeah, I would too. Oh man. All right, Chris. Well, this has been fun. For now, for this conversation, if people wanted to keep up with your work, especially Tripping on Legend, where can people find you for right now?
The show, they can go wherever they get their podcasts, and just look for Tripping on Legends, or just Google my name, you'll find it. Probably the best place to go, depending on your age. Like, I'm on Instagram at Spooky Tripping. Facebook is kind of where everything gravitates towards, and that's facebook.com/Tripping on Legends, and of course, my just straight website is trippingonlegends.com. And if you wanted to get any of my books, you could follow me on social media and hit me up if you wanted like a signed copy of something, or you can just go to Amazon. They're all listed on Amazon as well.
Pretty much anywhere books are sold.
And if you are in the great state of Florida, you can walk into pretty much every CVS or Cracker Barrel and you will find my book.
Cracker Barrel. Wow. I haven't heard that in a long time. All right. Well, for everybody else that's listening, if you gotten this far, you deserve like a cookie or something. But anyway, we're going to have Chris back on for part 2. For now, I hope you enjoyed this long conversation of everything between Pukwudgies to Bridgewater Triangle to basically somewhat of haunted Florida. But we will have Chris back because there's a lot more we can discuss. But until next time, people, keep your eyes open because you just never know if you're going to run into a apparition, and just make sure you, I guess, get it on film. Take care.